Hello, everybody. Um I'm Hilary Rodrigues. I'm a professor at the University of Lethbridge in the Department of Religious Studies. And the reason for this recording is to invite people to participate in an association that we have created, an association for Krishnamurti Studies. Um, It's an invitation to people who are interested in academic approaches to the study of different things, academics, in other words, but with a focus on Krishnamurti and his teachings. Now, at the outset, um, well, let me tell you a little bit about myself before I go on to talk about the association. I became interested in Krishnamurti as a teenager in my early years at university as an undergrad, reading something, and was quite inspired by his teachings. Tried to put them into you could say, uh, tried to live them, as it were, and found them to be extremely valuable. Later, I went back to university and joined a religious studies department to do graduate work and found that I focused on Krishnamurti. So I did my master's um, on his teachings on insight, and that study eventually was published as a book. I've gone on to write some academic papers and so on him, and still find his teachings very, very valuable and worth investigating. So um, the idea of creating an association for Krishnamurti studies is to invite academics to participate in whatever way they can in this kind of academic exploration of both the man and his teachings. First, let me just say something. I have some misgivings about just the name Association for Krishnamurti Studies. Recently, there's been a conversation going on that has been initiated by Friedrich Grohe on names for Krishnamurti schools. And what we find is that names are often inadequate. Uh, Krishnamurti, when he taught, often would not refer to himself and try to bring an attention to him. He'd refer to himself as K or the speaker. And in some sense, when we say we're focusing on Krishnamurti and Krishnamurti studies, there may be an excessive tendency to focus on the man and his teachings, when in fact, perhaps what's more important is what the teachings are pointing to. I found that Krishnamurti's central message of importance to me was on radical psychological transformation. But to create a association for radical psychological transformation, well, maybe that wouldn't kind of attract people. And so it's important to sort of recognize that an association for Krishnamurti studies is a meeting place for people who are interested in what Krishnamurti was pointing to. But he is a historical figure, and so it's also focused on the man and his place in history and so on. So it's both the man and his teachings and what his teachings imply, etc. So that's kind of the idea, the rationale behind the creation of an association of this type. And um, perhaps down the line, we have the possibility of having a journal of academic articles that people have written on Krishnamurti, or to have conferences where people can come together and share their ideas. I myself find Krishnamurti interesting from the perspective of religious studies, but there are those who find him interesting from the standpoint of philosophy or education or psychology, even the arts. So the association is an invitation to people from a very broad swath of disciplines who find aspects of Krishnamurti's teachings relevant and would like to discuss it comparatively, perhaps. Maybe you want to compare Krishnamurti's approach to education with that of Montessori, or perhaps you want to study it in its own right. Krishnamurti himself may not have been fond of comparative studies and so on, but in religious studies, we're quite familiar with doing things that a religious teacher is not that interested in. It's one thing to live the teachings. If I was doing Christian studies, one thing to try and live the gospel of Jesus and to love my fellow human beings and so on. And it's quite another thing to study Christianity historically in its context and its teachings and so on. Personally, I might find Christian teachings valuable and want to live and embody them in the way I live my life. At the same time, I have certain standards by which I should be operating as an academic doing Christian studies. So in the same way, the approach to Krishnamurti studies is to use our academic sensibilities in the study of him, bringing rigor to justify and substantiate arguments that we make, to challenge others based on whether they have provided enough evidence for what they have to say. And in so doing, we move beyond just speaking in opinions and feelings towards bringing the parameters of the conventional academia to the study of Krishnamurti. Now, whether conventional academia gets transformed in actually listening to what Krishnamurti's teachings have to say, well, that's another story, and that can certainly happen with time. I feel that bringing Krishnamurti into academic discourse will make him more accessible. Scholars who want to assign a piece of work on something, they might assign Krishnamurti, a book by Krishnamurti for their students to read, but quite often they assign academic papers where, because those have certain kinds of parameters that we in academia appreciate. And sometimes the focus is more direct and more accessible. You know, Krishnamurti on some aspect of education, listening, for instance, but someone has academically compared what he has to say with others on the value of listening and so on. Well, I could assign a paper like that in a class on curriculum in education and so on. So that's part of the rationale behind the association as well, to generate and have as a kind of a holding place, a forum for all this kind of these various types of academic studies. That's part of the rationale behind this association. Of course, I have much more that I can say, but I think I've gone well over my 5 minutes, so I'll stop there.